again. I'm here. We want to continue from where we left. Today we're going to start off by looking at sources of public finance. And we're saying that there are two major sources of public finance. One is public revenue, and two is public debt. Public debt in the sense of government borrowing. Like I said earlier on, that when the government is not able to raise enough money from within or from the other sources that we mentioned, then it will be forced to go out and borrow. But now let's look at these two independently. The first one is public revenue, as you can see there, and you're saying that this is the income that the government gets from its citizens, which is the major way in which it raises its resources. And we are saying that this major way, there are situations for which the resources come. The first source is through tax, where we are saying that this is a compulsory payment levied by the government on individuals and firms without any direct benefit to the payer. So when we realize a situation whereby a tax has been levied on an individual or a group of individuals or a farm, notice that this is money that is going to the government. You should not even complain about it, because sometimes before the taxes are levied, there's a guide on account of how much is going to be taxed from you as an individual or as a farm. So government raises, at point number one, money through taxation. Then number two, the government would raise funds through fines and penalties. And as you can note there, we are told that these are charges imposed on individuals, firms, and corporations who break the law of the country. At one point, maybe a friend of yours or your relative has been found on the wrong side of the law, and then he is told to pay a fine or given a penalty. This money does not go into the pockets of those officers. This is money raised for the government on account of that situation of fines and penalties. Number three, we have fees, and you realize that we pay so many types of fees. I just want to mention some so that you're given a direction. We have road licenses, like for example, if you go to get your road license, you have to pay some fee. We have marriage certificates, we have import license fees. All these types of fees, when we pay them, they are not going into somebody's pocket, but they are a form in which the government is raising money. The next aspect is through rent and rates. And I want to believe that normally when you watch your television, you'll hear that a certain governor has lifted or forgiven some people to pay rates for some given period of time, maybe because they're late, but they're given a duration for which if they pass, then they'll be charged even more. So we are told there that it is charged on the use of government properties. If you have a building within the central business district that belongs to the government, you need to pay rates. And therefore, the examples that we have there are game parks or forest. When you use those situations, then you are charged, and that is referred to as either rent or rates. Next is escheats. These are income that are obtained from properties of persons who die without legal heirs or proper wills. Such people's properties are taken to the government. Sometimes you could have heard of somebody who died and left behind a big portion of land or some buildings which, for a reason or another, they did not hand over to their relatives as inheritance. So such kind of properties, they'll be taken away by the government, and anything that will be coming out from them in terms of proceeds will be going to the government, and that's part of the raising of funds. We talk of dividends and profits. The government has certain undertakings, it has investments, and from the investments, there are dividends and profits that are earned, and that forms part of the raising of revenue. We also have interest from loans. The government normally gives out loans to various farms or even sometimes individuals, but it's popular with giving loans to farms. If it has to be given to individuals, then maybe that is in the act of selling of shares or something like that. So these loans earn interest. So when interest is earned out of these loans, then that goes back to the government in terms of raising the funds. Then we also talk about public debt or other government borrowing, which is now our number 2. When we talk about public debt, like any other situation, like an individual or myself, I would go out and borrow money. When I borrow money, then I become indebted to that person whom I borrowed money from. So the government also sometimes gets into a situation whereby it cannot meet its obligations because the money that it has is less. So this forces the government to go out and borrow. When the government borrows, then this is normally referred to as a national debt. The national debt is an outstanding amount of money that the government owes from a certain situation. Now, this includes borrowing from the national government itself or borrowing from the county governments, let me say that, but it's not very practical that they do that, or government corporations. Now, the debts are further divided into 2. We have internal borrowing and we also have external borrowing. Internal borrowing, I think it's rather obvious. When we talk about internal borrowing, we are talking about borrowing from within. When the government is not borrowing from beyond the borders of our country, then it means that we are doing internal borrowing. External borrowing is when the government is borrowing from outside. I think our country, we all know, is in an indebted situation because of certain loans that were borrowed from outside, but we're not getting into that. Now let's delve into these 2 situations deeply. We want to look at internal borrowing in a deeper way. We want to get into it deeply. And we'll see that it's borrowing by the government from farms, from individuals within the country. And this may include the following. 1, open market operations. This is where the government sells its securities such as treasury bonds, treasury bills, and this, however, we are told, has a disadvantage of causing something we call a crowding out effect, where the government leaves the private sectors with little to borrow from the individuals whom they've already undertaken to borrow from. Maybe let me just explain this aspect of crowding out effect, where we've already mentioned that it causes a disadvantage to the private sector. I want to believe that we cannot compare the private sector with the government per se, because the government has a ruling. When the government has borrowed in most of the areas where money can be borrowed from, the private sector is left without space or a place where they can go and borrow from. So when that is the situation, then the private sector is left stranded. They don't have anywhere to go and borrow from. And that situation is what we refer to as crowding out effect. A situation whereby the government borrows from all the spaces, all the places where everybody else should have borrowed from, government and private sector, and thus the private sector is left without anywhere to borrow from. Then when we talk about external borrowing, then we are referring to borrowing from external sources, like I had already said earlier. It may be either on a bilateral or a multilateral basis. Bilateral in the sense that it's one country dealing with another. Kenya is borrowing from another particular country, for which the borrowing is a deal between the two. Then we can also have the situation of multilateral borrowing, where the government borrows from international financial institutions like IMF, World Bank, Development Bank, Such bodies get finances from various sources, which they lend to their member countries who are in need of such funds. Maybe a little more explanation. When we say multilateral and saying that government borrows from many countries, I want to believe that we understand the fact that when we talk about IMF, then many countries have accounts with IMF. So when Kenya goes to borrow from IMF, it means that Kenya is being supported by many countries who have accounts in IMF, and therefore the multilateral aspect comes in, because now it is not a one-on-one, but it is spread across many countries who are also having their funds in there. Just like local commercial banks. Many people have accounts there, but when you go to ask for a loan, you're going to be given as an individual. How did the commercial banks raise the money? They did raise it because they have many people having their deposits in those various accounts that they hold in there. So I want to believe that when we talk about external borrowing, it is a good thing, yes, but the unfortunate bit about it is that sometimes it has some strings that are attached to it, which sometimes as a country we may not be able to add up to or to meet. So when we are not able to meet such conditions that have been put for us before we are able to be given the loan, then the loan may not be advanced to us. But if we meet the conditions, then we'll get the loan, but sometimes it stretches the economy so much. Because a loan is a loan, you have to pay it back at the end of the day. The interest rate may be so high. So when we talk about total internal borrowing, or rather internal debt, added to total external borrowing, or rather external debt, this now is what constitutes our national debt. That is what constitutes our national debt. Allow me get into something also here that is related to the debt. We have classes of debt. There are two. One is reproductive debt, the other one is dead weight debt. Maybe let me talk about reproductive debt. Reproductive debts are debts that are borrowed for particular purposes, such as projects, and when the projects start off, the debts are able to be paid back using the project's income. The income that comes from the projects that have been put up can be able to pay back the debts. So that's why we say that it's reproductive. The money that comes out of putting up a project or putting up a situation will go back into paying the debt. So that's why we call it reproductive. Then of course we have dead weight debt. These are debts which we borrow, but they're used to undertake certain financial recurrent expenditures, maybe like paying of salaries or famine relief. Such do not generate any income out of them. So you pay salaries and it goes. You pay famine relief and it goes. And you really need to look for money so that you can be able to make payment for the loans that you picked at some particular point. I think we want to stop at that. May you be blessed as we wait for another session next time. Thank you.